The crisp October air carried the scent of pine and damp earth, a fragrance Trevor Gaines had come to associate with peace. He stood at the edge of his property, a ribbon of freshly disturbed soil marking the line where his land met the common area of the Serenity Cove community. Beside him, a seasoned surveyor named Mr. Davies packed away his theodolite, the tripod's metal legs clicking shut with satisfying finality. "There you have it, Mr. Gaines," Davies said, handing him a rolled-up printout of the survey. "That iron pin we drove is the northeast corner of your lot. Anything lakeside of that is yours, free and clear, right down to the water's edge as defined by the county's high water mark." Trevor took the document, the paper cool against his fingertips. "Thank you, Mr. Davies. This confirms exactly what my deed says." He felt a quiet wave of vindication. For weeks, a cloud of uncertainty had hung over the small 2-foot extension he'd added to his dock, a simple platform to make it easier for his young nieces to cast their fishing lines without snagging them on the old pylons. As if summoned by the thought of a violation, a golf cart crested the gentle slope of the community path. It hummed to a stop a few feet away, and Judith Caraway, president of the Serenity Cove Homeowners Association, stepped out. She was flanked by Stan Gable, a perpetually nervous man who chaired the Architectural Control Committee ACC. Judith's posture was immaculate, her pastel polo shirt tucked crisply into khaki slacks. In her hand, she held a white 3-ring binder, its plastic cover gleaming in the autumn sun. "Mr. Gaines," she began, her voice a carefully modulated instrument of polite authority. "Stan and I are here for the scheduled inspection of your modifications." She said the last word, as if it were a particularly unpleasant insect. "Judith, Stan," Trevor replied with a calm nod. "Good timing. Mr. Davies was just finishing up the official survey." Judith's gaze flickered to the surveyor, and then back to Trevor. A brief, dismissive motion. "That's fine. But our concern isn't with your property line. It's with the integrity of the community's visual harmony." She opened her binder, the plastic rings snapping apart. Her finger, perfectly manicured, tapped a highlighted paragraph on a laminated page. CC&R Section 8.4.2. View corridor protection is quite clear. No structure may be erected or modified in a way that impedes the designated view corridors from common areas. Stan Gable cleared his throat, adjusting his glasses. It's a very important rule, Trevor, for everyone's enjoyment of the lake." Trevor held his ground, unrolling his new survey just enough to point, "I appreciate that, Stan. But as this document and the official county plat map show, the designated view corridor is an easement on the adjacent common lot. It doesn't cross my property." Judith's smile was thin, a mere tightening of her lips. "The board's interpretation, Mr. Gaines, is that the spirit of the rule extends to any structure that substantially alters the natural shoreline view from the community walking path. Your extension does precisely that." As she spoke, a young woman pushing a double stroller came up the path. It was Callie Brenner, a neighbor from 2 streets over. She slowed, her eyes darting between the tense tableau of Trevor, the surveyor, and the 2 HOA representatives. A flicker of sympathy, quickly masked by caution, crossed her face. She gave Trevor a small, hesitant wave and hurried on, pushing her children a little faster. The moment stung more than Trevor expected. It wasn't a public shaming, not overtly, but it was a quiet, potent display of Judith's power, the power to turn a simple property matter into a public spectacle, to make a neighbor feel like an outcast on his own land. Judith closed her binder with a decisive snap, a sound that seemed to seal her verdict. "You'll be receiving a formal notice. The extension will need to be removed within 30 days to avoid further action." She turned, not waiting for a response, and climbed back into the golf cart. Stan offered a weak, apologetic shrug before following her. The electric motor whirred, and they disappeared over the hill, leaving Trevor alone with the surveyor and the scent of pine. Mr. Davies shook his head slowly. "Been doing this for 30 years, he said, his voice a low grumble. "Seen my share of boundary disputes. But that's different. That's not about a boundary. That's about something else entirely." Trevor rolled up the survey. The crisp paper, a tangible piece of evidence in a fight, he now realized was just beginning. He looked out at the dock, at the small, sturdy platform he'd built with his own hands. It wasn't just wood and screws. It was a promise he'd made to his late wife, Sarah, in the final months of her life. A place on the water. "Trev," she'd whispered, her voice thinned by illness, but her eyes bright with the vision. "A place for your brother's kids to catch their first fish. A place for bonfires and stories. A place for us to be quiet together." He had bought this cabin, every board and nail of it, to honor that memory. It was his sanctuary, his stake in the quiet life they had dreamed of. And he would not let Judith Caraway, with her laminated rules and manufactured authority, take it away. Later that evening, the cabin was filled with the warm glow of a single lamp and the aroma of brewing coffee. The survey map was spread across the polished pine of his kitchen table, its stark black lines a declaration of his rights. Trevor held his phone to his ear, the familiar, gravelly voice of Frank Dillman on the other end. "So she brought Stan with her and quoted 8.4 for you?" Frank asked. There was no surprise in his tone. As a retired firefighter who had lived in Serenity Cove for over 3 decades, Frank had seen it all. Like she was reading from scripture. "Frank," Trevor replied, tracing the property line on the map with his finger. "I showed her the survey. Told her the view corridor easement wasn't on my lot. She didn't even look at it. Just talked about the spirit of the rule." A dry chuckle came through the phone. The spirit of the rule is whatever Judith Caraway decides it is on any given day. "Son, you need to understand something. This isn't her first rodeo. She's been running this HOA like her own personal fiefdom for almost a decade. I'm starting to see that. I just don't see how they can claim this. The documents are clear." "Logic doesn't matter when you're dealing with Judith," Frank warned, his voice turning serious. "Her power comes from procedure. She'll bury you in paperwork, wear you down with notices, and make you feel so isolated that it's easier to just give in and tear the damn thing down. She doesn't lose. Be careful. Trevor. This is the fight she loves." Trevor looked from the map to a framed photo on the mantelpiece. It was of him and Sarah, taken on a hiking trip years ago, both of them beaming, their faces warmed by the sun. The cabin wasn't just a house. It was the last chapter of their story, a place to build the memories she never got to have. The emotional cost of this fight was already beginning to settle in his gut, a cold, heavy weight. "I hear you, Frank," Trevor said, his voice hardening with resolve. "But she's picked the wrong fight this time." He ended the call and stared at the map. Frank's warning echoed in his mind. She doesn't lose. Maybe not, Trevor thought, but she'd never faced someone with nothing left to lose. And a promise left to keep. Exactly 1 week later, the mail carrier's truck rumbled down Trevor's gravel driveway, a sound that usually went unnoticed. But today, it stopped. Instead of leaving letters in the box at the end of the drive, the carrier walked to the front door and knocked. Trevor opened it to find a woman in a crisp blue uniform, holding a small electronic tablet and a green and white certified mail slip. "Letter for Trevor Gaines," she said, her expression neutral. Need a signature right here. Trevor signed his name on the glass screen, a knot tightening in his stomach. He knew what it was. Certified mail was the HOA's version of a declaration of war. It was official, it was documented, and it was meant to intimidate. He took the stiff, 9 by 12 envelope. The return address, printed in stark, impersonal type, Serenity Cove, HOA. CO Summit Property Management. Back inside, he slit the envelope open with a kitchen knife. The paper inside was thick, formal. At the top, in bold letters, it read, "Notice of Violation." The letter was a masterpiece of bureaucratic aggression. It cited his property address, the date of the inspection, and the specific covenant he had allegedly breached. Trigger 8.4.2, View Corridor Protection. It formally demanded the immediate removal of the unapproved dock modification. Then came the timeline. He had 30 days from the date of the letter to cure the violation. The final paragraph was the real threat. Failure to comply within the specified time frame will result in the levying of fines in the amount of $100 per day until the property is brought into compliance. Continued non-compliance may result in further legal action, including but not limited to the placement of a lien on the property. The clock was now ticking. This was no longer a polite disagreement on a sunny autumn afternoon. It was a legal threat, documented and delivered. The letter, dated and bearing a certified tracking number, was the first shot fired. Trevor read it again. The cold, impersonal language, a stark contrast to the deeply personal reasons he'd built the extension in the first place. He placed the letter on the table next to his survey. The two documents lay side by side, one representing the truth of his property, the other representing the fiction of Judith's power. The space between them was the battlefield. Trevor believed in reason. He believed that if you presented clear, factual evidence to rational people, the truth would prevail. It was with this conviction that he walked into the monthly HOA board meeting 2 weeks later. His property survey, county plat map, and building permits tucked neatly into a portfolio. The meeting was held in the community center, a sterile room with beige walls, fluorescent lighting that hummed with an irritating frequency, and a lingering smell of stale coffee. The 5 board members sat at a long folding table at the front. Judith was in the center, presiding with the air of a monarch holding court. Stan Gable was to her right, and the other 3 members a retired accountant, a real estate agent, and a quiet woman named Sandra Kim flanked them. Only a dozen or so residents were scattered among the 50 metal folding chairs, most of them regulars who came to complain about dog walkers or overgrown shrubbery. Trevor had signed up for a 5-minute slot during the homeowner forum when his name was called. He walked to the lectern at the front of the room, his footsteps echoing slightly. "Good evening," he began, keeping his voice calm and even. "My name is Trevor Gaines, from 114 Shoreline Drive. I'm here to address the notice of violation I received regarding my dock." He laid out his case with methodical precision. He displayed his professionally certified property survey, pointing out the iron pins and the clearly demarcated property lines. He then held up the official county plat map, showing how the designated view corridor easement for Section 8 was located entirely on the common area lot next to his property, not on it. "As you can see," he concluded, looking directly at the board members, "the modification to my dock is fully contained on my private property and does not encroach on any common area or designated easement. The permits were approved by the county, and I believe the violation notice was issued in error based on a misinterpretation of CC&R 8.4.2. He expected questions, perhaps a discussion. Instead, Judith Caraway smiled, a placid, unreadable expression. "Thank you for your presentation, Mr. Gaines," she said smoothly. She did not look at his documents. However, this is not the appropriate venue for an appeal. The homeowner forum is for general comments, not for challenging official notices from the Architectural Control Committee. Before Trevor could respond, she turned to the board. "Point of order," she announced, her voice ringing with procedural authority. "The ACC's decision is pending. I move that we table any further discussion of the matter at 114 Shoreline Drive until the committee has completed its final review." Stan Gable immediately piped up. "I second the motion." "All in favor?" Judith asked. 4 hands went up, hers, Stan's, and the other 2 men. Only Sandra Kim hesitated, her hand hovering for a moment before she, too, raised it. "Motion carries," Judith declared, banging a small wooden gavel on the table. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Gaines." Next on the agenda is a proposal for new holiday decoration guidelines. It happened so fast, Trevor could barely process it. He had been dismissed. His evidence, his carefully prepared case, had been swept aside by a procedural trick. He stood at the lectern, the maps still in his hands. As the meeting moved on without him, he was invisible. He packed his portfolio, his ears burning with a quiet, furious humiliation. As he walked back to his seat, he saw Callie Brenner near the back of the room. She had been watching him, a look of profound pity on her face. When their eyes met, she quickly looked down at her lap, as if afraid to be seen acknowledging him. He didn't stay for the discussion on holiday decorations. He walked out into the cool night air, the hum of the fluorescent lights still ringing in his ears. Logic had not won this fight. Reason had been gavelled into silence. Frank's words came back to him with chilling clarity. Her power comes from procedure. He now understood. This wasn't a dispute to be resolved. It was a war to be won. And he was going to need bigger guns. Frank Dillman's back porch was a sanctuary of worn wood and comfortable chairs, overlooking a yard filled with bird feeders and oak trees. It was here, 2 days after the disastrous board meeting, that Trevor laid out his predicament. She didn't even look at the maps. "Frank," Trevor said, pacing the length of the porch, "she used Robert's rules of order like a weapon and shut me down completely." Frank took a slow sip of his iced tea. "Told you, son. That's her arena. You can't beat her playing her game." He set his glass down. "When a fire's burning inside a wall, you don't fight it from the front. You find its source. You need to do the same with Judith. You need to dig. Dig where I have the survey, the plat map. What else is there?" "There are always records," Frank said, a knowing look in his eye. "Meeting minutes, old proposals, county filings. You need someone who knows how to navigate that maze. I know a woman, Sarah Jenkins, semi-retired paralegal, worked in the county clerk's office for 40 years, knows where every document in this county is buried. She's sharp, she's discreet, and she has no love for bullies." The next day, Trevor was sitting in Sarah Jenkins's small, tidy office above a local insurance agency. The room smelled of old paper and lemon furniture polish. Sarah was a woman in her late 60s, with intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and a no-nonsense demeanor that Trevor immediately respected. She listened to his story without interruption, her fingers steepled as she studied the documents he'd brought. When he finished, she gave a single, decisive nod. "A classic case of covenant abuse," she stated, her voice crisp. "The plat map is your foundation, but it's not enough. We need to see their internal records, specifically the unredacted board meeting minutes for the past 5 years." She explained the process. As a homeowner, he had the right to request association records under state law. The first request, sent to the management company, yielded predictable results. A thick packet of minutes arrived a week later, but key sections from several meetings were obscured by thick black lines. "Redacted," Sarah said, holding a page up to the light. "Standard practice when they're hiding something. They'll claim it's to protect homeowner privacy or attorney-client privilege. Nonsense." Sarah, however, knew the loopholes. She helped Trevor draft a second, more forceful letter, citing specific state statutes that mandated transparency and threatening legal action if unredacted copies were not provided, while they waited for that to bear fruit. She took Trevor to the county recorder of deeds office, in a dusty, climate-controlled room. She pulled the original, large-format linen plat maps for the Serenity Cove development. There, on sheet 3 of 5, was the smoking gun. The view corridor easement was explicitly drawn and labeled with meets and bounds. It was a 20-foot wide swath of land running along the edge of the common area lot, Lot 14C, which abutted Trevor's property. It did not cross onto his lot, Lot 15, by so much as an inch. "This is definitive," Trevor breathed, feeling a surge of triumph. "It is," Sarah agreed calmly. "But we're not done." A week later, a thick manila envelope arrived at Sarah's office. It contained the unredacted minutes. For hours, they pored over the dry, procedural language until, in the minutes from a meeting dated 2 years prior, they found it. Agenda. Item 6.4. Proposal to expand view. Corridor easement. President Caraway proposes a motion to amend the CC&Rs to expand the Section 8 view corridor easement to include a 10-foot setback on adjacent private lots, 15, 16, and 17, to preserve the natural character of the shoreline. Sarah read the next part aloud, her voice ringing with satisfaction. Discussion followed. Mr. Dillman voiced strong opposition, citing infringement on private property rights. The motion was put to a vote. Ayes 2, Caraway. Gable. Nays 3. Motion failed. Trevor stared at the page, the words seeming to lift off it. "My God," he whispered. "She's trying to enforce a rule that doesn't exist. A rule the board specifically rejected." "Precisely," Sarah said, a thin smile touching her lips. "She lost the vote to make it a rule, so now she's pretending it's one anyway, hoping no one does their homework." This was more than a misinterpretation. This was a deliberate fabrication. The discovery shifted the ground beneath Trevor's feet. The fight was no longer just about his dock. It was about exposing a calculated abuse of power. But as Sarah continued to dig, she would unearth something far more personal, a hidden motive that would transform the entire conflict from a simple HOA dispute into a bitter, personal vendetta. Sarah Jenkins was nothing if not thorough, having uncovered the procedural lie. Her instincts told her there was more to the story. Judith Caraway's actions felt too targeted, too obsessive, to be merely about a failed motion. So she kept digging, cross-referencing names, property records, and business filings, a digital breadcrumb trail that often led to unexpected places. A week later, she called Trevor into her office. The usual tidy stacks of paper on her desk had been replaced by a single open laptop. "Mr. Gaines," she began, her tone measured, "I believe I've found the why. It's not just about the view corridor." She turned the laptop toward him. On the screen was a business news article from 3 years ago. The headline read, "Gaines Logistics Secures Landmark Apex Corp Contract, Prompting Strategic Restructuring." Trevor remembered it well. It was the biggest deal of his career. The one that had allowed him to sell his company and retire early. The one that made buying the cabin possible. "Okay," Trevor said slowly, unsure of the connection. Sarah pointed to a name in the article's third paragraph. The restructuring at Apex Corp led to several high-level executives being offered early retirement packages. One of them was the senior vice president of operations, a man named Arthur Caraway. The name hit Trevor like a physical blow. Arthur Caraway, Judith's husband. "Are you sure?" Trevor asked, his mind racing. "Positive," Sarah confirmed. "I cross-referenced it with their marriage license and property deed." Arthur Caraway was forced into a retirement he wasn't ready for. Right after your company won the contract that his division lost. They bought their house here 6 months later. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. The constant scrutiny, the refusal to look at evidence, the fabrication of a rule. It was never about a dock. It was retribution. "She's blaming me for her husband's career ending," Trevor said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "It would appear so," Sarah said, "but suspicion isn't proof." She clicked open another file on her computer. It was a forwarded email chain. "I have a contact. A former board member who resigned because he couldn't stand working with Judith. He was still on an old internal email list. He sent me this. It's from Judith to Stan Gable. Right after you closed on your cabin." Trevor leaned in and read the words on the screen. "Stan, I see a Trevor Gaines has purchased the old Miller cabin. I've done some research. This is the man whose company put Arthur out of a job. A man like Gaines doesn't belong here. He represents everything that's wrong with the modern corporate world: ruthless, disruptive. He needs to learn that in Serenity Cove. There are rules. He needs to learn his place. We will be watching him closely." The email was a confession. It was the Rosetta Stone that decoded every hostile action, every procedural roadblock. This wasn't an HOA president enforcing rules. This was a woman using the power of her position to wage a proxy war against the man she held responsible for her family's perceived downfall. Trevor leaned back in his chair, a cold anger settling deep within him. He thought of Judith's meticulously manicured garden, her sterile, perfect home he'd passed on his drives. He had once glimpsed her through her window at dusk, alone, painstakingly arranging orchids on a windowsill, her expression one of profound, lonely concentration. He'd felt a brief pang of sympathy for her then. Now, he saw it for what it was, a desperate attempt to control one small corner of a world she felt had spun out of her control. Her obsession with the HOA wasn't about community. It was about reclaiming the power and status her husband had lost. And Trevor was her target. This knowledge changed everything. He was no longer just fighting a bureaucratic bully. He was fighting a deeply personal, hidden vendetta. And Judith, now cornered, was about to become more dangerous than ever. Armed with the truth, Trevor felt a surge of confidence. But it was short-lived. A cornered animal is a desperate one. And Judith Caraway, sensing her control was being challenged, escalated her campaign. First came the notice of hearing, delivered again by certified mail. It scheduled Trevor's official hearing before the board in just 5 days, a blatant violation of the HOA's own bylaws, which required a minimum of 14 days' notice. It was a classic ambush tactic, designed to give him minimal time to prepare. The hearing itself was a farce, held in the same sterile community center. It was less a hearing and more a show trial. Judith, acting as prosecutor, judge, and jury, dominated the proceedings. When Trevor tried to introduce the official plat map as evidence, she ruled it inadmissible. "The board is not a land surveyor's office, Mr. Gaines," she declared, her voice dripping with condescension. "We are here to interpret the community's covenants, not county documents." She refused to acknowledge the unredacted minutes proving her motion had failed years ago, calling them irrelevant to the current violation. The board, with the exception of Sandra Kim, who looked deeply uncomfortable, fell in line. The vote was 4-1 against him. A notice of fine was issued on the spot, a one-time penalty of $500, plus the $100 per day fine, retroactive to the expiration of the original 30-day notice. The total was already in the thousands. 2 days later, a letter arrived from the HOA's law firm. It was a formal intent to lien, a legal document stating that if the fines were not paid promptly, the association would place a lien on his property, a powerful legal claim that could eventually lead to foreclosure. The threat was no longer theoretical. It was a clear and present danger to his ownership of the cabin. Simultaneously, Judith began targeting his allies. Frank Dillman received a formal violation notice for a patch of discolored siding on the back of his house, an issue that had been ignored for years. The notice cited a rule about maintaining a uniform and pristine exterior appearance, and came with a threat of fines. The most vicious attack, however, was reserved for Callie Brenner. She received a notice declaring that her son's portable basketball hoop, which they rolled to the curb on weekends, was an unapproved permanent structure and a nuisance, demanding its immediate removal. For Callie, a single mother on a tight budget, the threat of daily fines was terrifying. She called Trevor that evening, her voice choked with tears. "I can't afford this. Trevor," she sobbed, "I can't afford to fight her. The boys love that hoop. It's all they have to do in the evenings. What am I supposed to do?" Hearing the fear and despair in her voice was Trevor's lowest point. His fight for principle was causing real harm to innocent people. The weight of it was crushing. He sat on his porch long after the call ended, watching the stars appear in the darkening sky. Was he right to continue? Was his personal battle worth the collateral damage to his friends and neighbors? Judith wasn't just trying to break him anymore. She was trying to isolate him, to make him a pariah whose very association brought ruin to others. It was a cruel, calculated move. And, for the first time, Trevor felt a flicker of doubt. Maybe Frank was right. Maybe Judith Caraway just didn't lose. Doubt gave way to resolve. The attacks on Frank and Callie, meant to isolate him, had the opposite effect. They solidified his conviction that this was no longer about his dock. It was about stopping a tyrant who used community rules as a cudgel. The annual homeowners meeting, scheduled for the following week, was his last, best chance. It was the one meeting Judith couldn't completely control. It was a public forum. The community center was packed, standing room only. The air was electric with anticipation. Residents who had never attended a meeting in their lives were there, drawn by the weeks of escalating drama. At the front of the room, a large projector screen displayed the agenda. Next to it, a digital timer was set to 500. Each speaker during the open forum would have exactly 5 minutes. When Trevor's name was called, a hush fell over the room. He walked to the lectern, not with a portfolio of papers, but with a simple USB drive. He plugged it into the laptop, his movements calm and deliberate. The timer started its countdown 500, 4:59. "Good evening," he began, his voice clear and steady, amplified by the microphone. "My name is Trevor Gaines. Most of you know me by now. You know I'm in a dispute with the board over my dock. But tonight, I'm not here to talk about my dock. I'm here to talk about our rules and how they are being used." 4:30. He clicked to his first slide. It was a high-resolution image of the notice of violation he had received, with CC&R, Fair Rate .4.2, highlighted in yellow. "This is the rule I was told I broke. Section 8.4.2, View Corridor Protection. I was told this rule prevented me from making a minor modification to my own dock on my own property." 3:50. He clicked again. The screen split. On the left was the official county plat map. The view corridor easement, clearly marked on the common area lot. On the right was his certified property survey. A red line showed where his dock extension was well within his property lines, and nowhere near the easement. "This is the truth," he said simply. "The county's map and my survey. As you can see, the rule doesn't apply. The view corridor is not on my land." A low murmur rippled through the crowd. People were leaning forward, pointing at the screen. It was simple, visual, and undeniable. 2:45. He advanced to the next slide. It was a scanned image of the unredacted meeting minutes from 2 years prior. He had highlighted the failed motion. And this is the proof that our president knows the rule doesn't apply. Because 2 years ago, she proposed a new rule to expand the easement onto my property and others. This board, he said, gesturing to the table, voted that proposal down. It failed. What is happening to me is not the enforcement of a rule. It is an attempt to enforce a rule that does not exist. The murmurs grew louder. Stan Gable sank lower in his chair. Judith's face was a mask of cold fury. 1:55. Trevor took a breath. This was the crucial moment. He clicked to a new slide, which showed a picture of a folder with the words Exhibit D on it. Now, I could use my remaining time to prove a pattern of selective enforcement. In this folder, I have photographic evidence of clear violations on other properties, ignored for years, including a significant, unapproved structure on the property of a current board member. The room went dead silent. Every eye was on him. Judith's knuckles were white where she gripped her gavel. This was the moral twist. He could destroy another person to save himself. He could stoop to her level. He looked out at the faces in the crowd, his neighbors. He saw Callie Brenner, her expression fraught with hope and fear. He let the silence hang for a long moment. "But I am not going to show you what's in this folder," he said, his voice dropping slightly, but filled with conviction. "Because this fight isn't about shaming our neighbors or punishing each other. It's about demanding integrity from our leadership. It's about applying the rules fairly and consistently to everyone, or not at all." The tension in the room broke. A wave of applause started at the back and swept forward. It was a powerful, spontaneous roar of approval. He had taken the high road, and in doing so, had won over every undecided person in the room. 0:30. The timer was a flashing red. "My time is almost up," he said over the applause. "We need to restore transparency and trust in this community. Therefore, before my time expires, I formally move for a full, independent audit of all Architectural Control Committee decisions, fines, and financial records for the past 3 years, to be conducted by an outside firm." The timer hit 0:10. Frank Dillman, who had positioned himself near the front, stood up, his old firefighter's voice booming through the room. "I second that motion." The timer beeped, hitting 0:00. Trevor stepped back from the lectern. His 5 minutes were over. He had laid the evidence bare, demonstrated his character, and proposed a solution. The rest was up to the community. The chaos that followed Trevor's motion was immediate. Judith hammered her gavel, shouting that the motion was out of order, but her voice was drowned out by a chorus of residents demanding a vote. Sandra Kim, the board member who had remained quiet for so long, finally found her voice. "Judith, they have a right to vote on this," she insisted, her voice cutting through the din. "It was a proper motion, and it was seconded." Seeing the tide turning so decisively, the other 2 board members quickly agreed. The vote on the audit was called. It wasn't even close. A forest of hands went up in favor. When Judith asked for the nays, only a handful of her staunchest allies, and her own, were raised. The motion passed with overwhelming support. The effect was instantaneous. The board, seeing the catastrophic collapse of Judith's authority, immediately held a whispered, frantic conference. A moment later, Sandra Kim made another motion. I move to suspend all fines and pending actions against Mr. Gaines, Mr. Dillman, and Mrs. Brenner, pending the results of the independent audit. It was seconded and passed in seconds, 4-1, with Judith casting the lone dissenting vote. She sat in stunned silence, her face pale, the binder of rules lying closed and useless before her. Her power had not just been challenged, it had been publicly dismantled in under 10 minutes. In the days that followed, the fallout was swift. The real estate agent and the retired accountant, facing the humiliation of the audit, resigned from the board via email. Stan Gable followed suit a day later, his letter citing personal health reasons. Judith Caraway was left isolated, a president with no allies on a board that now viewed her as a liability. The atmosphere in Serenity Cove transformed. The quiet tension that had permeated the neighborhood for years began to dissipate. As Trevor walked to his mailbox, neighbors who had previously offered only curt nods now stopped to shake his hand. "Thank you," an older woman told him, her eyes sincere. "You did what the rest of us were too afraid to do for years." He received quiet, respectful acknowledgments from people he barely knew, a silent consensus that he had fought for them, not just for himself. The community, once fractured by fear and suspicion, was slowly beginning to heal. The independent audit took 6 weeks, and its findings were more damning than anyone could have imagined. It revealed years of systemic inconsistencies, arbitrary enforcement, and sloppy bookkeeping. But the final report contained a bombshell. The auditors had uncovered a clear pattern of collusion between the HOA's management company, Summit Property Management, and a single preferred contractor. Summit had been routinely recommending this contractor for violation remediation, fixing everything from loose siding to unapproved paint colors. In return, the contractor was giving the management company a 10% kickback on every job. The audit revealed that nearly 80% of all fines levied over the past 3 years had been for violations that conveniently required this specific contractor's services. The revelation sent shockwaves through the community. It wasn't just about Judith's personal vendetta. The entire system was tainted by corruption. The remaining board members, led by Sandra Kim, held an emergency meeting. Their first act was to terminate the contract with Summit Property Management. Faced with the irrefutable evidence from the audit and the threat of a formal removal vote, Judith Caraway finally yielded. She submitted a 1-sentence letter of resignation, effective immediately. There was no apology, no explanation. She simply vanished from her position of power. With 3 vacant seats on the board, the community needed to rebuild. A special election was held. Frank Dillman was nominated and accepted immediately. Then, to Trevor's surprise, several neighbors approached him, urging him to run. "We need someone with integrity." Trevor, Callie Brenner told him, "Someone who will fight for the right reasons." He was hesitant. At first he had only ever wanted peace and quiet, but he realized that protecting that peace now required his participation. He accepted the nomination and was elected to the board alongside Frank and Callie. His first action as a board member was to propose a complete overhaul of the architectural review process, creating a new, transparent system with clear guidelines, a formal appeals process, and anonymous submissions to prevent personal bias. Months later, on a warm spring evening, Trevor stood on his dock. The extension, the source of the entire conflict, felt solid and permanent under his feet. The setting sun cast a golden glow across the lake. From the shore, He could hear the sound of his nieces and nephews laughing as they roasted marshmallows over a bonfire his brother had built. He cast his line out into the glassy water, the lure making a quiet plink as it landed. He looked down the shoreline toward Callie Brenner's house. In her driveway, her two sons were playing a lively game of basketball. The rhythmic thump, thump, thump of the ball on the asphalt, a cheerful, defiant sound. The basketball hoop was in full view, a small monument to a victory won not with anger, but with principle. The peace he had fought for was finally real, shared by the entire community. He wasn't just a resident anymore. He was a part of Serenity Cove, and its future was brighter than ever.